The June sun was soft that morning, the kind that made memories feel warmer than they really were. Evelyn Moore adjusted the pearl clasp on her necklace with steady fingers, even though her heart felt like it was trembling inside her chest. Today was supposed to be a day of closure. Her daughter Tessa, once a wild, grieving teenager, now a poised 23-year-old graduate, was finally walking across the stage. Evelyn had waited for this moment like a woman waiting for a storm to pass. Years of late-night phone calls, therapy sessions, silent dinners. This was supposed to be the reward, the healing. Evelyn, 67, had planned every detail, from the pale blue dress she'd wear to match the university colors, to the delicate bouquet waiting in the back seat. Her husband, Richard, had promised he'd make it on time. He was flying in from Chicago, where he claimed to have a client meeting with an old firm contact. She believed him. Of course she did. After all, they'd been married for 28 years. She'd weathered his distance, his absences, his work trips. She'd chalked it up to age, to a man afraid of retirement, clinging to purpose. But something about this day didn't feel right. Maybe it was how Tessa had barely spoken in the car that morning. Maybe it was the way she kept looking at her phone, like she was waiting for a message she didn't want to read. They took their seats at the graduation hall, hundreds of families fanning themselves under the makeshift tent. Evelyn scanned the rows behind her, searching for that tall frame she'd memorized decades ago. Then she saw him, 5 rows back, in a black sports coat. Not in the seat next to her, not hurrying toward her with flowers or apologies. He was already seated, beside a woman she didn't recognize. A younger woman, maybe mid-40s, glossy brown hair, tasteful dress, and beside her, 2 teenage boys, one around 14, the other older, maybe 16 or 17. They looked polished, familiar. Evelyn's throat tightened. She watched as the younger boy nudged the woman and pointed toward the stage. The woman leaned over to Richard and whispered something in his ear. Richard laughed. That lazy, amused laugh Evelyn had once fallen in love with. He placed a hand on the woman's knee. Evelyn blinked. Her vision wavered. Then came the name over the speakers. Tessa Moore, Bachelor of Fine Arts, summa cum laude. Applause erupted. Evelyn stood and clapped, pride fighting the nausea creeping up her spine. But what chilled her blood was what she saw when she turned slightly. That other woman was crying. Crying as if her daughter had just walked the stage. Richard clapped too, but not in her direction. Evelyn sat down slowly, her knees unsteady. After the ceremony, they made their way to the reception lawn. Tessa had vanished briefly into the crowd. Evelyn tried to breathe, to hold the illusion together for just a few more minutes. That's when she heard it. 2 girls behind her chatting near the punch table. One whispered, giggling, "That guy's got 2 families or something. My friend said those boys are his kids too." Seriously? They do kind of look like him. Damn, that's wild. Evelyn's world tilted. Everything went white at the edges. She turned her head slowly. Richard was now walking across the lawn, arm casually slung around the younger boy's shoulder. The woman was beside him, laughing. They looked like any happy family celebrating a graduation. But it wasn't their graduation. It wasn't their daughter. It was hers. And Richard had just clapped louder for a stranger's child than he had for the girl he raised. She felt the blood drain from her face. Every lie, every delay, every unexplained expense, every strange perfume on his collar came rushing back like a buried corpse clawing through dirt. She gripped the edge of the table, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into the linen. Tessa returned, her eyes locked with Evelyn's. She paused. She knew. "Mom," Tessa said, voice barely audible, "please don't ask. Not here. Not today." But Evelyn didn't respond. Her gaze never left Richard. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, pulled her phone from her purse, and began to walk, slowly, toward the shadows cast by the university trees. Her heart was pounding, not from grief anymore, but from calculation, because something had just broken inside her. Not love, not trust, something deeper. Dignity. And once a woman like Evelyn Moore loses her dignity, there's only one thing left to do. Get it back. Publicly, ruthlessly, permanently. Tessa's warning echoed in Evelyn's ears long after she disappeared into the crowd. Please don't ask. Not here, not today. It was too late for that. The seed had already been planted. And it wasn't just suspicion now. It was something heavier, something sharp, something cold. Evelyn sat on a quiet bench near the edge of the reception lawn, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened her phone camera. She zoomed in on Richard. He stood under the shade of a cherry blossom tree, one arm around the older boy, laughing at something the woman had said. The boy tossed a football back and forth with his younger brother. Their movements were familiar, athletic, confident. Richard's smile looked too natural, too real, not the forced politeness he used at home. This was the smile Evelyn hadn't seen in years. She hit record. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to focus. Frame the shot, get the faces, the closeness, the touches, the ease. Not for revenge. Not yet. She needed to see it again, to be sure she wasn't hallucinating this betrayal. That night back at the hotel, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat in the darkened room, the city lights casting fractured reflections on the window pane. Her phone sat on the table, playing. The same 30-second video on loop. Laughter, touch, familiarity, family. She opened her laptop and began to search. Her mind moved fast now. Clinical, detached. Years of domestic silence had taught her how to move invisibly. And tonight, invisibility would be her armor. She accessed their airline account, a shared login she'd used 100 times. Richard's recent flights were listed. He hadn't flown from Chicago. He'd flown from Charlotte. And before that, from Miami. Two cities Evelyn had never once been to with him. She scrolled through past reservations. One date caught her eye. December 18th, the week he told her he was stuck in Denver for a snowed-in business retreat. But the flight? It landed in Savannah. That was the same week Evelyn spent Christmas Eve alone, watching It's a Wonderful Life while waiting for Richard to return. He never did. He sent a photo of a snowed-in tarmac and said, "Sorry, sweetheart, flight's all canceled. I'll FaceTime you tonight." She remembered that night, the weak signal, the dark room behind him. He said he was in a hotel lobby. Now she saw the truth. She opened their shared bank statements next, filtered for that week. Two charges stood out. Seaside Bistro, $120.95, and Happy Family Portraits, $379. She clicked View Location. The portrait studio was in a beach town called Hilton Head. Her breath hitched. A happy family. Portraits. What family? Certainly not hers. She was beginning to drown in the data. Flights, restaurants, charges, until a sinking realization hit her. This wasn't a one-time affair. This wasn't a mistake. This was a life. The phone buzzed. A message from Richard. Dinner with old clients ran long. Sorry I missed reception. Love you. See you in the morning. Love you. The audacity. Evelyn didn't reply. She just stared at the message for a full minute before locking the phone. The next morning, she left the hotel before sunrise. Dressed in a crisp tan coat and soft leather gloves, she parked across from the Airbnb address she had found through Richard's credit card history. She waited. At 7:12 a.m., the door opened. Out came the woman, wearing a robe, coffee in hand. She was barefoot, comfortable, home. 2 minutes later, Richard stepped out behind her, hair tousled, coffee in hand. He kissed her cheek. And then the boys followed. One of them grumbled something about cereal, and Richard laughed again. They looked like a picture-perfect Sunday family. Evelyn's eyes didn't blink. She didn't cry. She took a picture, one clean, clear photo of the four of them. She drove away, not back to the hotel, not to her daughter. She needed time, quiet, control. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't even about heartbreak. It was about invasion. She realized now this other life had been built not beside hers but inside it, like a parasite, funded by her stability, hidden in her blind spots. The betrayal wasn't emotional, it was architectural. Her entire world had been designed around lies, and she was done being part of his blueprint. By Monday morning, Evelyn Moore had become a woman with a mission. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She researched. In her neatly manicured world of social brunches and floral arrangements, there was one woman who stood out like a switchblade tucked in a purse. Linda Caraway, 62, a retired police sergeant turned private investigator. They met years ago in a book club. Evelyn once called her brash and unapologetic. Now, she called her at 6:14 a.m. sharp. Linda, Evelyn said, voice flat, I need to know how deep this goes. I don't want guesses. I want receipts. Linda didn't hesitate. Send me what you got. I'll handle the rest. Within hours, Evelyn's inbox began to fill with files. Names, addresses, financial transactions. Linda was efficient, thorough, and ruthless in a way Evelyn now envied. The woman in the Airbnb? Dana Collins, 47. No marriage certificate. 2 sons, Micah and Eli. Both listed Richard as father on school registration forms. He had signed them. Dana owned a modest home in a small suburb outside Charleston, but she didn't buy it. Richard did, using a shell company registered under an obscure LLC called Pine Haven Equity, the same LLC Evelyn had once seen on a mysterious tax document their accountant brushed off as a consulting vehicle. He paid Dana's mortgage. He paid her HOA fees. He covered the boys' private school tuition. It was Evelyn's money. She checked the dates. The same month Evelyn cashed out a $50,000 CD to help Tessa with student housing, Richard wired $47,000 from their joint trust account to Pine Haven Equity. There was no trace of that money ever coming back. And the worst part? He used her signature, forged, perfectly. Linda sent a scanned image. Evelyn stared at it, her own name, in her own handwriting. But she never signed it. A cold weight settled in her chest. A violation deeper than infidelity. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. This was financial assault. She whispered to herself, he's not cheating. He's stealing. More files arrived. Richard had been quietly selling off her jewelry over the past 2 years. Items she thought were misplaced. A brooch from her mother, a pair of diamond earrings from their anniversary. Gone, listed as lost during a move. Pawned, sold, replaced with lies. Linda's next email came with subject line, he's laundering through her. Attached were scans of real estate deeds. 3 small properties under Dana's name, all bought in cash. All paid through the same LLC. Some were in foreclosure. The paper trail was messy, but not accidental. Classic layering technique, Linda explained on a call. Spread the money through fake purchases. Flip. Properties for cash. Hard to trace unless you're looking. Evelyn was silent on the line. You still there? Linda asked. Yes, Evelyn finally said. I'm just trying to understand how long he's been planning my erasure. Because that's what it was. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't weakness. This was strategy. Richard had used her trust, her savings, her home equity, to bankroll a second life, one that didn't include her. He wasn't escaping with a mistress. He was relocating, funded by fraud. And if Evelyn hadn't stumbled upon it, if she hadn't seen them at graduation, he would have succeeded. He would have drained everything and vanished behind a carefully folded lie. By Tuesday afternoon, Linda dropped the final bomb. He refinanced your house 6 months ago, she said. Signed the documents through power of attorney. Evelyn's voice cracked for the first time. I never gave him POA. He forged it. Not hard to do when you've been married that long. Notary was fake, already under investigation. Evelyn stared at the deed transfer. Her home, her sanctuary of 30 years, was no longer fully hers. Half belonged to Pine Haven Equity, which meant half belonged to Dana Collins, which meant the woman crying at her daughter's graduation was living off her property value. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and exhaled. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This wasn't about dignity. This was about justice. She didn't want him to just be exposed. She wanted him unraveled. She wanted the life he built from her bones to collapse, in public, in court, and in shame. Evelyn didn't go to Dana Collins' house to scream or slap or accuse. She went to listen, because only fools walk into war without studying the terrain. Using a burner phone and a fabricated identity, Elaine Matthews, recently widowed, looking to relocate, she scheduled a property tour at a short-term rental Dana managed under the name Coastal Retreats. It was one of the homes Richard had purchased under the Pine Haven LLC. At precisely 10:30 a.m. on Thursday, Evelyn stood on the front porch of the cottage by the marshes, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back, and wore a calm, emotionless smile. The woman who opened the door was trim, stylish, and had the kind of warmth Evelyn once admired. Dana didn't look like a gold digger. She looked like a mother, like someone who'd seen hard years and held her family together anyway. "Elaine, right?" Dana said cheerfully. "Come in. It's still a bit of a mess. I'm getting the patio redone." Evelyn stepped inside and nearly gasped. There, on the hallway table, in a brass picture frame, sat a photo. Dinah, Richard, and the two boys, all wearing Santa hats, smiling in front of a fire. Her fire, that mantle, the stonework. It was identical to the one in the beach house Evelyn designed with her own hands 20 years ago. She scanned the room. Every rug, every chair, the side table she inherited from her aunt, reupholstered, painted. Dana caught her staring. "My husband's taste," Dana chuckled. "Well, partner, technically. Rick's a bit old-fashioned with furniture, but he has good instincts. Found most of these at estate sales." Estate sales? No. Evelyn had cataloged those pieces during their last move. They were hers. She focused on breathing, steadying her voice. "You said Rick?" "Oh," Dana blushed slightly. "Richard. Everyone calls him Rick here. He hates being too formal." Evelyn's spine locked. He told Dana his name was Rick. He'd compartmentalized even his identity. The tour continued. Dana showed off the newly remodeled kitchen, the garden, the boys' art projects on the fridge. She spoke casually, fondly, like a woman who believed her world was safe. At one point, Dana poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and said, "Rick wanted to be here to meet you, but he got pulled into a work meeting last minute. He's always working, even on family time." Evelyn asked lightly, "What does he do again?" "Consulting. Architecture, I think. Something with developments." Then Dana added, "He's been helping me expand this business. Said it's time I had something of my own. He's good like that. Supportive." Evelyn's stomach turned. He was grooming Dana the same way he once did with her, using her money, her network, her style. But then the dagger. Dana opened a drawer in the hallway looking for a business card. Inside, Evelyn saw it. The ruby brooch. Her mother's brooch. The one Richard claimed was lost in a move. It wasn't lost. It had been given away like a party favor. Dana picked it up. "Isn't this stunning? Rick gave it to me last Christmas. Said it was his mother's, but she passed young." Evelyn's jaw clenched so tight she thought her molars would crack. That was her mother's brooch. Custom-made, engraved. And Richard had pawned off the origin like he'd pawned off Evelyn's entire identity. She realized then, Dana wasn't some homewrecker playing mistress in the shadows. She was in the light, living a full life, with holidays, portraits, gifts, with Evelyn's history carefully rewritten. But as much as rage swelled in Evelyn's chest, what surprised her more was pity. Dana didn't look like a woman scheming her way through a man's wallet. She looked like a woman who'd been lied to, just like Evelyn, who believed she was building something real, not living inside a stolen narrative. As she stepped outside, Evelyn turned. "Thank you for the tour," she said. "The home's lovely. Feels, like it holds a lot of memories." Dana smiled. "Yes, Rick's really made it ours." Evelyn nodded once. "I imagine he has." She walked away with the image of the brooch seared in her mind. She didn't confront Dana, because Dana wasn't the target. Richard was. And this time, Evelyn wasn't coming for him in private. She was going to burn the lie where it was born. In the place he most wanted to maintain control. In public, in front of family, at a dinner he'd never forget. The restaurant was perfect. Upscale, private dining room, vaulted ceiling, one long table. Evelyn chose it for its acoustics. She arrived early, spoke to the staff, made arrangements, paid for everything up front. The room was hers, the moment was hers. On the surface, it was just a graduation dinner, a celebration for her daughter's academic success. But underneath, it was a trap, carefully, methodically baited. She had told Richard she'd invited some of Tessa's friends, a few academic donors from her art program, people he wouldn't recognize anyway. She told him to wear something sharp. "It's a classy affair," she said sweetly. He didn't suspect a thing. Neither did Dana. She arrived 20 minutes late, Richard by her side, hand on her back. The two boys followed, slightly bored, dressed in the stiff button-ups. Dana carried a congratulatory gift bag with tissue paper poking out the top. Tessa sat at the end of the table, silent, eyes down, fingers trembling around her glass. She hadn't spoken to Evelyn since the night of the ceremony, but she was here. She knew. Everyone took their seats. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, calm and graceful, holding a glass of white wine. "I'd like to begin by toasting my daughter," she said. "Tessa, you've grown into a brilliant, grounded woman, despite the chaos around you." Tessa's eyes flicked up. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. The room chuckled politely. Dana leaned into Richard and whispered something. He smiled, raised his glass. That's when Evelyn placed a small black gift box on the table. "This is for you, Richard," she said, "for being such a supportive father." Richard blinked. Dana looked amused. "Ah, that's sweet." Richard opened the box. Inside, a stack of printed photos, carefully arranged. First image, Richard kissing Dana's cheek outside the Airbnb. Second, the two boys calling him Dad. Third, a deed with Dana's name in Pine Haven Equity LLC. Fourth, Evelyn's signature, forged. Dana's smile faltered. Tessa looked like she stopped breathing. "What is this?" Richard asked slowly. "Evidence," Evelyn said, her voice ice, "of your second life, your second family, your second mortgage, all funded by my first and only bank account." The room went silent. Evelyn turned to Dana, voice still smooth. "You seem lovely, Dana. Kind even. And I'm genuinely sorry you were lied to. But the ruby brooch you're wearing in the graduation photo? That belonged to my mother. Richard said it was his. She died in 1989. Dana froze. Richard stood up. "Evelyn, not here." "Oh, absolutely here." Her voice rose, not to shout, but to dominate. "You see, I planned this room," she said, stepping to the side. "The acoustics are designed for clarity, for maximum impact, just like your lies." She opened a laptop on the table. A projector cast images onto the far wall. Photos, documents, transaction logs, video footage of the boys calling him Dad at the Airbnb. Dana gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. The boys were silent, confused, glancing at each other. Tessa whispered, "I didn't know it went this deep." "Of course not," Evelyn said. "He trained us both to look the other way." She walked slowly toward Richard, wine glass still in hand. "Here's what I've done in the last 72 hours, she said evenly. "I've frozen the accounts, filed criminal reports, brought in a forensic accountant. The IRS will be calling. And Pine Haven Equity, it's being audited, thoroughly." Richard's face was pale. Dana stood up. "You said you were divorced. You told me—" "I bet he told you a lot of things," Evelyn cut in. "He's very convincing, especially when he's stealing from women too polite to question him." Dana's voice cracked. "You used me." "You're not the first," Evelyn said, "but you can help make him the last." Then she turned to her daughter. "I'm sorry, Tessa. You deserve better than to have your graduation wrapped in deceit, but you also deserve to see what truth looks like. Raw, ugly, and without apologies." Tessa stood. She walked slowly toward her mother, then hugged her, tight, like a child who had grown up too fast, but never let go. Dana gathered her boys and left, quiet, shaking. Richard remained frozen, destroyed, alone. Evelyn turned to the room. "Enjoy your meals," she said to the stunned guests. "I've already paid for everything. I just needed to make sure he did." Then she walked out of the restaurant with her daughter beside her. Not as the betrayed wife, But as the architect of consequences, it didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the following week, Richard Moore's once respected name, the man known for designing half the hospitals in 3 counties, was smeared across every social circle that once welcomed him with open arms. But it wasn't just whispers at the country club or cold stares from former clients. This time, the government got involved. 3 days after the confrontation, Evelyn met with an attorney who specialized in white-collar crimes and financial abuse. She brought a binder, thick, tabbed, and color-coded, filled with evidence: photos, transaction logs, copies of forged signatures, real estate records, even the notarized power of attorney Richard had faked. "You're sitting on enough to press criminal charges," the attorney said. "We're talking forgery, identity theft, elder financial exploitation, mail fraud, maybe wire fraud. If he used any of this across state lines, it escalates." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I want it all filed," she said. "Civil, criminal, IRS, whatever burns." The lawyer leaned back. "You sure? This could destroy him." Evelyn looked him dead in the eye. "He already destroyed me. I'm just rebuilding on the ashes." By the end of that week, Richard was served, in public, at a real estate conference no less. The footage of him getting handed the thick envelope while surrounded by colleagues would later circulate online with the caption, "The architect who couldn't design a moral compass." But the real blow came 2 weeks later, when the IRS launched a formal audit. Turns out, Evelyn's suspicions hadn't even scratched the surface. Richard had been funneling money into a network of shell accounts for years, hiding assets in fake consulting firms, claiming tax write-offs for non-existent renovations, and using Pine Haven equity to shield over $600,000 in unreported income. Much of it had been funneled through Evelyn's name, some under her Social Security number. The IRS agent looked Evelyn in the eyes and said, "If you hadn't come forward when you did, you'd be the one liable." It sent a chill through her. She remembered the night she'd nearly convinced herself to stay silent, the part of her that still clung to decades of loyalty, the part that wanted to avoid scandal, the part that was scared. But that part was dead now. In the months that followed, Evelyn took back everything. She filed for a reversal of the fraudulent deed transfer, and a judge ruled in her favor. The house was legally restored under her name. Richard had no claim. Dana's mortgage was also pulled into question, and while Evelyn didn't push for eviction, the property was seized as part of the criminal investigation. Tessa, once quiet, distant, began showing up more often. She stayed for dinners, helped her mother renovate the guest bedroom. Their bond, cracked by years of silent pain, began to mend through shared truth. And as for Dana, she reached out once, a handwritten letter, tear-stained, apologizing, explaining. She had no idea Richard was married. He told her Evelyn had died of ovarian cancer a decade ago. He spun stories of grief, of reinvention, of wanting to give his sons a new life. He even staged a fake grave visit with flowers to a cemetery where Evelyn's real parents were buried. The audacity of it made Evelyn shake, not from rage but from disbelief. Still, she didn't press Dana in court. She withdrew her as a civil defendant. Dana agreed to testify against Richard, providing emails, bank statements, and recordings, including a voicemail in which Richard said, "She's just an old woman with money. She'll be dead before she notices anything missing." That recording became Exhibit A. By the end of the trial, Richard was sentenced to 5 years in Juan, federal prison, followed by supervised financial probation. He was also ordered to pay restitution, totaling over $300,000, most of it going back to Evelyn. His professional licenses were revoked. His firm severed all ties. He lost everything. And still, Evelyn didn't gloat. She didn't attend the sentencing. She was already moving on. Instead, she sat in her garden that day, under the arbor Richard once refused to repair, sipping tea and reviewing the charter for her new foundation, the More Trust Initiative, an organization that helps women over 60 identify, prevent, and fight financial exploitation by spouses, family, and caregivers. Because the one thing Evelyn Moore had learned through pain and humiliation was this: silence serves no one. Evelyn thought it was over. She had exposed the affair, reclaimed her finances, and stood victorious while the man who tried to erase her name was marched into a courtroom in shackles. She should have felt relief. Instead, there was a whisper inside her, faint but persistent. Because men like Richard don't lie once. They lie in layers. And if you peel away one skin, you don't find the truth. You find another mask. It began with a letter, delivered by certified mail. No return address, no postmark she could trace. Inside was a single photograph. A woman, maybe in her late 30s, holding a toddler on her hip. Brown curls, big eyes, familiar nose. The photo was taken in front of a faded building in Alabama. A handwritten note on the back read, "You're not the only one. Ask him about Maggie." Evelyn stared at it for hours. That name, Maggie, meant nothing. But the eyes on that child, they were his. She didn't go to Linda the PI this time. She went directly to the federal agent assigned to Richard's financial case, a sharp, humorless man named Alvarez. "I need to know if Richard's passport ever showed international travel," she said. Alvarez squinted. "Why?" "Because I think there's another family, possibly out of state, possibly out of the country." It took 3 days. Alvarez called her back. "He traveled to Belize 6 times over the last 4 years. Always alone, always using cash for hotel bookings. No customs issues, but we found something interesting. A wire transfer of $70,000 from one of his shell companies to a Margaret Ann Keller. Listed occupation, nanny." Evelyn nearly dropped the phone. Not because of the money, but because she'd heard that name before. Years ago, Richard had mentioned hiring a temporary caretaker while consulting abroad. Evelyn assumed it was part of a project he didn't want to discuss. She didn't pry. She trusted him. Another mask. She dug through old files, pulling out an archived email from 2019, one of Richard's travel itineraries. The emergency contact listed? M. Keller. Evelyn returned to Linda, gave her the photo, the name, the timeline. It took less than a week for Linda to confirm it. Richard had a third life. Not a fling, not a cover identity. An entire woman, Margaret Keller, 38, who believed she had a committed partner, a stable provider, and the father of her child. The boy's name was Jackson, born in 2020. Evelyn saw a copy of the birth certificate. Richard's name wasn't on it, but that wasn't surprising. He learned his lesson with Dana's boys, but the clinic records showed his signature under insurance provider. She called Tessa that night. "There's more," she said quietly. "There's a child, a little boy." Tessa didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then she asked, "Are you going after custody?" Evelyn almost laughed. "No, sweetheart. I don't want his past. I just want it recorded. I want every life he tried to fake to be laid bare." She did reach out to Margaret, anonymously through Linda. Margaret was devastated, furious, shattered. She sent Evelyn a folder of Richard's emails, text screenshots, videos of him playing with Jackson, kissing his cheeks, calling him buddy, promising they'd go to Disney when things calmed down. In one video, Richard is holding Jackson and says, "You're my legacy, little man. One day all this is gonna be for you." Evelyn's chest ached, not from sadness, from disgust. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had used his fatherhood like a weapon, a costume, a performance. And in doing so, he created a trail of broken lives behind him, each woman thinking she was the only one who truly knew him, when none of them ever did. With the new evidence, prosecutors reopened the financial case. Turns out Richard had more accounts. In crypto wallets tied to Belize, holding an additional $240,000. They seized everything. Even in prison, he was losing more. More assets, more lies, more of his hollow empire. But for Evelyn, the greatest victory wasn't legal, it was psychological. Because now when someone Googled Richard Moore, they didn't see a claimed architect. They saw a convicted financial predator with multiple secret families. The garden bloomed that spring in a way it hadn't in years. Maybe it was the fresh soil, or the new irrigation system Tessa had installed herself after watching Evelyn wrestle with the tangled hose one too many mornings. Or maybe, Evelyn thought, it was simply this. Everything toxic had finally been pulled out by the root. The lies, the decay, The man who pretended to be a husband while planting destruction in every corner of her life. Gone. Evelyn stood by the arbor, the one Richard always said wasn't worth fixing. She had it rebuilt from reclaimed wood, stronger, taller. There were lavender vines crawling up the side now. She liked that. Something fragrant, built on something discarded. For the first time in decades, she didn't wake up with a clenched chest or a subtle fear that something was wrong. There were no more hollow explanations, no more phantom meetings, no second phones left charging in the bathroom. Just quiet and clarity. On the patio table sat a letter she hadn't opened. From prison, Richard's name was scrawled across the return address. Tessa had brought it over. She'd rolled her eyes but left it unopened. "Up to you," she said. "But personally, I'd use it to light the grill." Evelyn hadn't burned it. Not yet, but she hadn't opened it either. She didn't need his words to close her story. Instead, she opened a manila envelope, the charter documents for her foundation, now official, the Moore Trust Initiative. She'd already held 2 workshops for women in their 60s and 70s, teaching them how to identify red flags in shared accounts, false POA forms, and digital deception. Women from churches, book clubs, senior centers, all of them had stories. "I signed a deed I didn't understand. My son took over my pension to help. My husband handles everything. I don't even know what banks we use." Evelyn sat with them, shared her scars, showed them the tools, because pain should never just be endured, it should warn. Tessa stepped out into the garden, holding 2 mugs. "One black, one with oat milk," she said, smiling. "Still can't believe you drink your coffee like a trucker." Evelyn took the mug, smirking. Well, I was married to one emotionally." They both laughed. It wasn't the laughter of denial. It was the laughter of women who had survived a fire and didn't smell like smoke. "Did you ever love him?" Tessa asked, suddenly quiet. Evelyn stared out at the vines. "I loved the man I thought he was. I loved the future he promised me. And I loved the version of myself I became. Patient, trusting, loyal, for his sake." She looked at her daughter. "But none of that was real. And love without truth is just a slow form of drowning?" Tessa nodded. Her eyes shimmered but didn't fall. "You taught me how to spot liars," she whispered, "by showing me how to destroy one." They sat in silence for a while. A breeze carried the scent of rosemary and fresh soil. In the distance, wind chimes played an uneven song. Evelyn had always hated that, the unpredictable clanging, but now it felt right. Not everything had to be composed. Some things just needed to be free. She finally picked up the letter from Richard, held it, weighed it, and without a word she stood and walked to the fire pit, tore it once, then again, and again, dropped it in. The flames curled around the paper, turning confessions and manipulations into smoke. Let someone else carry his legacy. She was done. That night she opened her journal, wrote just 3 lines. "He built a castle of lies. I burned it down brick by brick, and planted a garden where the ashes fell." She closed the book, poured a glass of wine, and watched the moonlight rise over the life he tried to steal, but she reclaimed.